Every fire leaves a mark. Unless someone has the power to burn the mark too. Inspector Franklin Baker. New York City, July 1994. The Bronx is sweltering in heat and the sound of fire engines wailing as they head north, where an abandoned industrial building is ablaze. Detective Franklin Baker, 38, one of the NYPD's most veteran cops, stepped out of his car, his fireproof suit still smudged with smoke from a crime scene less than an hour earlier. His face was experienced, his sharp eyes always observing every detail around him. Third one this month, boss. The young cop walking beside him gasped. Same abandoned factory. No one owns it. Random. Baker frowned. Nothing happens in the Bronx. Everything is planned. The question is who? And why? Police cordoned off the area. Firefighters still battling the blaze. A body was found near the stairs to the second floor, a man. About 50. Unidentified. No identification. A partially burned briefcase was found nearby. Baker knelt down, looked at the body and picked up an unburned object, a piece of paper, on which was printed a faint part of the logo, Senate Committee, Internal Report. A Senate document? He whispered. Before he could call the forensics department, a shout came from behind the building, "We found a man." A teenager, no more than 18, with messy brown hair and a panicked expression, was being held back by two officers. He wore a dirty hoodie, his hands still stained with smoke. I didn't do anything," he shouted. "I was just passing by. I heard someone calling me so I ran in." His name was Alexander Grant. No identification. No evidence to prove he was just passing by. And unfortunately for him, security cameras from the store across the street recorded him leaving the scene minutes before the fire broke out. Baker studied the boy. Something was off. Instead of the panic that had come naturally, Alexander's eyes were calm. Strangely. "What are you doing here at midnight?" Baker asked. Alexander was silent. "Who was the dead person in the building?" Baker continued. He shook his head. "I don't know." Baker turned to the young officer. "Get his prints. Run them against the database. And take him to the station for questioning." The boy was led away. But as he passed Baker, he turned back, looking him straight in the eye for the first time. "You don't know what you're touching." 2 a.m. NYPD Bronx interrogation room. Baker poured him a glass of water. Alexander Grant, 17, adopted son of Senator Edward Grant, graduated 2 years early, with a spotless record, and now, the prime suspect in an arson and murder case. Baker read from the printout. Alexander remained silent. Baker looked at him. "You know who I've arrested? Mafia. Serial killers. Corrupt cops. But few of them have eyes like yours. You're not afraid of being caught. You're afraid of being exposed." Alexander chuckled. "I have nothing to reveal. But you do." Baker was stunned. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head and whispered, "Try saying my name out loud in this room. See if anyone dares to deal with me according to the law." Just then, a middle-aged man in a black suit entered, Senator Grant's personal assistant. He held a hastily signed release order in his hand. "Alexander has been released on bail. And this investigator," he pointed at Baker, "will not be allowed further contact without orders from higher up." Baker was furious. "The case is not over." The man smiled faintly. "It is not for you to decide that." The next morning, Baker received an anonymous phone call. "Franklin. I was your colleague at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The man you found in the fire, he was my witness. His name is Davis, He had a copy of the internal report on Edward Grant's illegal funds. The boy you arrested, he was no simple man. He was a pawn. Or a player. Then the machine cut off. That afternoon, while Baker was reviewing the evidence, his office was raided by the NYPD's chief inspector. The suspension order was signed. The reason, suspected of tampering with evidence. Baker stood silently before his empty desk, his face cold as stone. He knew he had touched a force that was not easy to retreat from. Some people are born to be protected, others, to be used and forgotten. Alexander Grant. New York, May 1984. Edward Grant had never been patient with children. But when he entered St. Bartholomew's orphanage in Queens that morning, he was particularly interested in a little boy sitting alone in a corner of the yard, his face smeared with ink and his eyes emotionless. "What's that one?" Edward asked his guardian. "Alexander. 6 years old. Mom's a drug addict. Dad's missing. No one comes to see him. No one asks about him." Edward nodded, thoughtful. A child like that, no strings, no backing, no roots, was perfect. A blank canvas on which to paint whatever image he wanted. 10 years later, at Grant Mansion, Long Island. Alexander Grant, 17 years old, has grown into a smart, calm, and emotionally controlled teenager. He speaks appropriately, acts appropriately, and most importantly, is absolutely loyal to Edward. But beneath that docile shell was something sharper and colder than anything Edward had ever trained. Alexander observed more than he spoke, and learned quickly. "I'm going to Yale," Edward announced, pouring him a drink despite knowing he was underage. "After that, I'll work in state government. After that, Congress. And maybe beyond." Alexander did not reply, but his eyes were fixed on the fire in the fireplace. "Why did you choose me?" he asked, for the first time. Edward shrugged, smiling. "Because I'm a malleable being, someone you can trust." Alexander nodded slightly, but deep down he knew, faith wasn't about emotion. It was about control. 3 months before the fire, April 1994. Edward Grant is embroiled in a secret Senate investigation, with leaked reports suggesting his campaign was involved in money laundering through shell companies in the Bahamas. An anonymous witness, named Davis, who worked in the campaign accounting office, stole part of the documents, intending to turn them over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Edward was furious. He called Alexander to his office at midnight. "Davis is hiding in an old warehouse in the Bronx. He has documents. If they get out, the whole operation will collapse." Alexander was silent for a long time, then asked, "What do you want me to do?" "Deal. Leave no trace. No contact. No witnesses." The night of the fire, Alexander left the warehouse with the briefcase he had stolen from Davis. But he didn't expect an old security camera to be active. Even less likely was Davis to try to escape out the back door, and burn to death on the stairs. The clean plan turned into a mud puddle. When the police arrested him, Alexander wasn't scared, just a little disappointed. He knew his foster father wouldn't let him stand trial. But the incident made Alexander realize one thing: he was a tool. And a tool is only good until it's broken. After his release, Alexander did not return home. He went straight to Grant Holdings headquarters, where there was a special floor reserved for Edward's shadow projects. There, Alexander opened the copy of the financial records Davis had left behind. Among the hundreds of lines of data, there was one particular entry: top secret funds, code K1092, $3.5 million, transferred to South Shore Juvenile Correctional Center. Alexander was silent. It was where his mother was held before she died of a drug overdose. The charity Edward publicly announced was actually the site of illegal medical experiments. He realized, Edward wasn't just using him as a political figure. He was also using his painful past to clear his name. From that day on, Alexander was no longer his foster father's good child. He started playing two games. On one side, continue to be Edward's right-hand man. On the other side, quietly collect evidence. Not to overthrow immediately, but to save yourself. If one day everything collapses, the truth cannot be burned. It just lies there, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it up. Franklin Baker, New York. September 1994. The third-floor apartment in an old Lower East Side apartment building was the only place to take Franklin Baker after he was suspended from the NYPD. No sign, no teammates, no badge, just him and the thick files scattered on his desk. For more than a decade, he had stood on the bloody gang front lines in Harlem, tackled major drug busts in Queens, and risked his life in post-Cold War domestic terrorism raids. But never before had he felt swallowed up by such cold silence. The name Alexander Grant is now more than just a profile. It is the nexus of a web of power, and Davis's death is just one small link in it. One evening, as Baker was poring over a copy of the files Davis had kept, a handwritten note was slipped under his door. No name, no address, just these words in block letters. If you continue, you will disappear, like him. Him? Who? Davis? Or someone else Baker had never heard of? He picked up the paper, pursed his lips, folded it, put it in his coat pocket, and went out. He needed an ally, and he knew who could help, a woman who had long since abandoned the NYPD to go her own way, Linda Torres. An investigative journalist who had brought down two state politicians with nothing more than a pen and a camera. They met in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. Linda appeared tired, but her eyes were still sharp as knives. Long time no see, Franklin. I heard you were tabloid fodder last month. Baker smiled wryly. If you believe the tabloids. Linda didn't say anything, just poured him a cup of coffee. Go ahead. It seems like what you brought is more important than the arrest warrant. Baker spread out the printouts, financial documents leaked from Davis, shady dealings, and a recording he had accidentally captured on the NYPD's faulty radio, a recording of Edward Grant shouting about getting rid of Davis and that itchy police rat. Linda scanned each line. Her eyes stopped at one detail, Fund K1092. This. I saw it in an investigation 2 years ago. A fake nursing home in New Jersey. The financial documents were all signed by Vortex Capital. What does it have to do with Grant? Baker asked. Linda exhaled. Vortex is a shell company set up by Grant Holdings. I tried to dig deeper, but the more I dug, the more my sources were cut off. A journalist I worked with, Steve Mertz, disappeared. No one has found him. Still no conclusion. Baker was silent for a few seconds. I think I'm next on the list. In the following weeks, they began an undercover investigation. Linda dug up financial records that had been tied to Grant Holdings. Baker tracked down records that had been forgotten by the NYPD or accidentally removed from the system. The pieces began to come together, a vast money laundering scheme that spanned non-profits, real estate, correctional facilities, and even private health care. But even more frightening were the names on Grant's protection list, not only politicians, but also several high-ranking FBI figures and several major newspaper editors. One evening, Linda received an anonymous email with an attachment, video of the Bronx fire. They opened the file, and Baker's heart sank. In the black and white clip, a figure walks out of the back door of the warehouse. He carries a briefcase. His face is unclear, but clearly, he walked past Davis's body without stopping. Linda whispered, "No rescue. No report. No response. Someone left Davis to die to preserve the documents." Baker nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. Alexander Grant. When the truth becomes a threat, silence is the weapon of the strong, but it is also the blood of those who dare to resist. Linda Torres. 3 weeks after the threatening facts, Franklin Baker lives as a ghost in the very city he once policed. Every night, he moved between 3 different safe houses. His documents were hidden on multi-layer encrypted hard drives, scattered in packages, dropped off at pawn shops and anonymous mailboxes around Manhattan. His data was his lifeblood. And now, Linda, the only person left standing by him, had disappeared. Not trusting the police, he followed the GPS signal embedded in her watch. The last stop was an abandoned office building in Brooklyn. No body. No clues. No gunshots. Just a crushed phone and a smudged lipstick mark on the cement wall. "I know what I'm doing. If I don't come back, you do the right thing for me." Linda's last message, 3 hours before she went missing. At the same time, a call came in from a familiar extension number. The voice on the other end made him pause. Captain Vincent Morello, who had led the task force Baker had served on for 8 years. Who had been a close friend, who was now the deputy chief of the NYPD. "Franklin, we need to talk." They met at Cypress Hills Cemetery, a place where no one could set up a camera without being detected. Morello was in plain clothes, without insignia. His eyes were tense. "I have exactly 3 minutes, Morello said, without beating around the bush. Someone wants you gone. Not legally. Not reported. A traffic accident. Or a suicide due to post-traumatic stress disorder." "Is that Grant?" Baker asked. "It's not just him," Morello said, his voice low. "He has people in the department. People you trusted. People you trained. Are now his eyes and ears. Linda has been under surveillance for the past 2 months. And now." He fell silent. Baker clenched his fists. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I owe you my life for Bronx 89. Morello turned away, his voice low. "And because even though I'm scared, I know what's right. You have one chance. Go. Get the hell out of New York. Before they clean you up." But Baker did not leave. Instead, he returned to his old room and opened the last file Linda had encrypted. There was a new file on his hard drive, one he had never seen before. Alex Private Archive.lock. Baker used a code Linda had texted him, Othello 1994, a metaphorical password known only to the two of them, since they both loved Shakespeare. And that year was a disastrous one for Baker. The file opens. Inside is a series of recordings from Grant Holdings' internal camera system. The short videos, arranged in chronological order. Alexander secretly backed up financial records. A recording: "I can't believe my dad did this to my mom. I can't keep pretending." A call to Linda: "I will give you everything. But I need to make sure I don't die before the truth is told." Franklin Baker stood still. Cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck. Alexander Grant was not a murderer. He was a whistleblower. But why? And why the silence? Just then, the phone rang. An unknown number. Security protocols immediately logged the call. "Mr. Baker." "Who is speaking?" I am the one you are hunting. And the one being hunted like you. Alexander? No. This is what's left of me. The part of me that I didn't sell to the Grant family. What do you want? I want justice. But I don't trust the police. I don't trust politicians. I don't trust the law. Only you. I'm listening. Linda wasn't captured to be killed. She was captured to lure you out. But I can take you to her. For what price? You help me end this. Together. We don't choose where we are born. But we choose where we live. Alexander Grant. Abandoned Pier. East Bronx. 1:17 a.m. Franklin Baker stood alone in the cold mist that penetrated his tired bones. Before him, the rusty dock was covered with moss and the sands of time. A few dozen feet away, the silhouette of a young man sat on the old railing, hands in the pockets of his long coat, eyes looking out at Manhattan glowing in the night. Alexander Grant. No more designer suits. No more bodyguards. No more CEO looks on the cover of Forbes. Just a lonely man, waiting for forgiveness, from the past, and from himself. You came faster than I thought, Alexander said, without turning back. You sent me your location. I have no reason to delay. Baker replied, stepping closer. It takes time for people to swallow the truth. I thought you were that kind of person. Baker was silent. They stood side by side. The one who had pursued, and the one who had fled. Who is your mother? Baker asked, his voice low. You said your adoptive father used her past to clear his name. But your record is spotless. Alexander smiled softly. Because you are not allowed to find her. Alexander pulled out an old photo. It showed a woman with curly hair, dark brown skin, and eyes very similar to Alexander's, holding a baby in a thin blanket in the middle of winter. In the background was the building South Shore Correctional Center. My mother is Teresa Miller. She was forced to take psychiatric drugs in a 1981 pilot program funded by Grant Holdings under the guise of rehabilitating at-risk youth. Baker frowned. That program has been cancelled. On paper, Alexander said, his voice choking. The truth is they continued the experiment in nameless residential centers. My mother was one of the last victims. She died when I was 7. My adoptive father, Edward Grant, did not take me in out of compassion. He knew I was a living stigma. Baker sighed. The pieces finally fell into place. You didn't kill Davis, he said softly. No. Alexander replied. I was ordered to retrieve the documents. I didn't know Davis was hiding downstairs. By the time I found him, the fire had already started. I didn't save him. And I will never forgive myself. So why now? After all these years? Baker asked. Why not just let it sink in like he wanted? Alexander was silent for a long time, then replied, his voice as small as the wind. Because Linda risked her life. Because he didn't die. And because I don't want to die with the name he made up. They left the dock. Alexander took Baker to a secret apartment in the Bronx, one of the data dens he had set up over the years. The vault contained dozens of hard drives, scanned documents, videos, and bank receipts, all related to money laundering, media network payments, illegal rehabilitation programs, and witness killings. On a back wall, a map of the United States hangs covered with red pins. These are people who disappeared after touching Grant's system, Alexander said. Not everyone is as lucky as you and Linda. They agreed on a plan. Rescue Linda, who is being held in a fake medical facility in suburban New Jersey, under the false name Franklin Creek Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center. take the data international. Using the independent press network, Linda had in contact within Europe and Canada, revealing Edward Grant's identity to the public, along with a series of undeniable documents. But first, they need to get past the surveillance system that is operating 24/7 around both of them. An empire is not afraid of the truth. It is afraid of the light shining on it. Linda Torres. Grant Holdings Operations Center. 58th floor. Manhattan. Dim yellow lights illuminated Edward Grant's steely face as he stood before the large screen in the campaign control room. The glass reflected the cold, emotionless eyes of a man who had controlled power for more than 3 decades. On the screen are 2 profile files shown in red boxes: Target A, Franklin Baker, ex-NYPD; Target B, Alexander Grant, whistleblower, classified risk level, critical. "We've had wolves in the house for too long," Edward said, running his hand across the glass table. "It's time to clean up." His personal assistant, Harold Voss, nodded. Operation Silence has been activated. Delta is tracking Baker and Alexander from the Bronx to New Jersey. "And Linda Torres?" Edward asked. "She is still being held at Franklin Creek. But if they approach the facility, the Zetas will strike first." Edward smirked. "Good. Don't let them get to the paper. And if they do, make sure all the evidence is burned." Upstate New Jersey, Franklin Creek campus, 2:44 a.m. Franklin Baker and Alexander Grant were in the back of a food delivery truck driven by an old acquaintance of Baker's. On the internal map that Alexander extracted from the Grant system, Franklin Creek was not a normal rehabilitation center. It was a mental prison with no sentence, no rules, no chance of leaving. Linda was locked in the deepest basement, G block, where victims of the re-education program were kept to ensure they never told their stories. "We have 18 minutes before security check," Alexander said, unlocking the gate. "I'll go straight down to G. You watch the security floor and open the back gate if I'm successful." Baker nodded, drawing the old pistol he had always carried since his days in the NYPD. He didn't like violence, but he knew this time, no one would fight for justice but them. Level G, Franklin Creek Underground. Linda Torres lay motionless in her windowless cell, her limbs shackled. Her face bore an old, barely healed wound. Her eyes were open, vigilant. She was not the type of woman to collapse in fear. The lock clicked. The door slowly opened. She tilted her head, and her heart skipped a beat. Alexander appeared, breathing heavily, holding out the key. "We don't have time. Let's go." At the same time, Baker noticed the security system go into alert level 3. Someone had picked up the trail. A signal was triggered, and red lights began flashing throughout the area. "We have a problem," he said over the radio. "There are people running, armed." "We'll be there in 5 minutes," Alexander replied. A gunfight broke out in the narrow hallway. Baker hid behind a metal door, taking out 2 gunmen in fake security uniforms. Meanwhile, Alexander, while supporting Linda, had already installed a code to wipe the internal data on the server, but when he plugged in the USB, the system automatically recognized the encryption code and issued a warning. "They have a time bomb in the server," Linda whispered. "If we don't wipe it out, the entire database will explode in 10 minutes. Alexander gritted his teeth. "We can't retreat empty-handed. I need at least 4 more minutes." Baker, who was slightly wounded in the shoulder, shouted over the intercom, "I'll hold the door. You two take care of the rest." Outside, an unmarked task force enters the area, led by a tall man in sunglasses, one of Grant's top assassins. "I want them dead on the spot. No witnesses. No cameras," he ordered. But as soon as his team entered, an explosion came from the basement server, not from a bomb, but from the anti-encryption system that had been activated prematurely. Alexander plugged in the portable hard drive, looked at the countdown timer, 23%, 41%, 67%. 40 seconds left, he shouted. Baker emptied the last clip, slammed the iron door shut, and set up a mini-mine to block the way. He shouted, "Go up now." Linda, in pain, grabbed Alexander's hand. "If I don't get it, everything will be for nothing." Alexander roared, plugging in a second hard drive, backing up the data. "I won't let anyone else die in silence." Countdown timer 0:05, 0:04, 0:03. The three of them rushed out the side door, just as the server floor exploded, shaking the ground behind them. They escaped in a car in the middle of the night, carrying a hard drive containing nearly 700 gigabytes of confidential data, evidence of 30 years of lies, murder, money laundering and manipulation of public power. Behind, Franklin Creek was engulfed in flames. When the truth explodes, it doesn't pick sides. It just picks those brave enough not to be burned by it. Franklin Baker. New York, 2 days after the explosion at Franklin Creek. The leak, titled The Truth About Grant, Uncut, No Filter, was uploaded to a number of international secure online platforms, including Wikidata Underground, DarkLeaks, and Ghost Press. It was downloaded nearly 6 million times in 12 hours. Major news organizations were initially hesitant, but pressure from the public and the independent investigative community became too much to ignore. CNN, Reuters, Al Jazeera, BBC, Washington Post, one after another. A series of shocking headlines exploded across the newspapers. Grant Holdings, an empire of silence, forgotten victims, children, homeless people, and the ghosts of America's healthcare system. The whistleblower is the tycoon's adopted son. Franklin Baker returns, the falsely accused ex-cop unmasks a powerful empire. In an underground apartment in Brooklyn, Franklin Baker sits with Linda Torres and Alexander Grant. "We've woken up the public," Linda said, flipping through the analysis. "But not enough to topple him. He still controls the cabinet, the domestic media, and part of the FBI." Alexander nodded. "I need time. If I can get in touch with a few people in Grant's financial network, they will confirm the illegal funds. But there is one person I haven't found yet." "Who?" Baker asked. "The only survivor from the 1981 test program, and eligible to testify at the federal level. A woman named Maggie Doyle. My mother mentioned her before she died." Linda turned to her notes. That name appeared in a report from South Shore Correctional Facility, but was later crossed out. The last entry read, "Dead on record." Alexander looked at Baker. If she lives, she could be the last bullet. Baker called an old acquaintance, Jesse Rhodes, a former FBI agent who now ran a private investigation office in Baltimore. "Jesse, I need you to track down someone, Maggie Doyle, a former subject in the South Shore experiment. Declared dead, but I believe faked." Jesse sighed. If her name was on the death list, she was either really dead, or under witness protection, or hidden so they never get to testify, Baker said. At the same time, Linda contacted an independent investigative journalism organization in France, La Vérité, which had worked with her on insider hunting cases at the United Nations. They agreed to protect Alexander's identity, provide a temporary server for the dataset, and open it up to public scrutiny in Europe, where Edward Grant had no power to interfere. "We're just one step away," Linda said. "But that step requires a real person." While Baker and Linda coordinate internationally, Alexander decides to return to St. Louis, his mother's hometown, where Maggie Doyle once lived after escaping from a rehabilitation program. Under a false identity, he went to the slums in the west of the city. After 3 days of searching, he finally met an old woman selling vegetables on the roadside, who used to be a close friend of Teresa, his mother. "Maggie?" the old woman said, frowning. "I thought she died in the church explosion in 2002. But, no. Someone said she was taken somewhere, under government protection." Alexander was silent. "Does she have children?" "There was one. But no one knew who it was. At that time, everything was erased as if it had never existed." Baltimore, Jesse Rhodes' office, 3 p.m. Baker received a phone call. "Franklin. I got it. Maggie Doyle isn't dead. She's living under another identity, Margaret Donnelly, on a ranch in Wyoming. And listen, not just alive. She's waiting for someone to come find her. The truth may be hidden in the snow, but a single spark is enough to melt the ice. Maggie Doyle." Wyoming. 6 a.m., Donnelly Ranch. The sun hadn't quite risen yet. A cool autumn wind blew across the vast prairie, whistling through the leaves. A simple log cabin nestled at the foot of a hill. Inside, the kitchen lights cast a pale yellow glow. Franklin Baker stepped out of the dusty SUV. Alexander Grant climbed into the back, clutching his briefcase. "She's waiting," Jesse Rhodes said, pointing to the house. "I sent word. She knows who you are." Inside the kitchen, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied back at the nape of her neck was pouring coffee. Her eyes were cloudy but bright, her voice still firm. "I thought no one would dare come. But looking at you two, I guess the game has come to an end, huh?" Baker nodded. "We need your testimony, Maggie. The whole country needs it." Maggie Doyle, or Margaret Donnelly, who lived incognito for more than 2 decades under the tenuous protection of a retired former agent, is one of the last 5 survivors of Project Genesis, a psychological re-education program and neurobiological drug experiment secretly funded by Grant Holdings in the 1980s. "I kept it all," Maggie said, placing a wooden box on the table. "Not out of revenge, but because I knew someone would need it to end this." Baker opened the box. Inside were old VHS tapes, handwritten notebooks, and a more modern USB drive, one Linda had sent Maggie 8 years ago, when she first found out about her. Alexander was stunned when he saw the handwriting in the diary. It was his mother Teresa Miller's handwriting, copied by Maggie. "You knew my mother?" Alexander asked. "Teresa was the only one of us who dared to resist. She helped me hide when the South Shore fire broke out." Maggie looked him straight in the eye. "And you are her last legacy." The conversation was interrupted when Jesse returned with a tense look on his face. "We have a problem. A black SUV just pulled up 300 meters away. Encrypted license plate. Here they come." Alexander responded quickly. "Maggie and I are going through the back door. Franklin, get the hard drive and the files, get in the car." The 3 of them rushed out the back gate and around the stables. Jesse stayed behind to hold off the pursuers. He had no intention of leaving the woman he had sworn to protect for the rest of his life. Gunfire in the Wyoming dawn. Later that day, Manhattan. Linda Torres stood in the safety of her Brooklyn apartment, looking at a digital map showing Baker's route. When the signal that the car had left the danger zone rang, she breathed a sigh of relief. "I just confirmed with our partners in Brussels," she said by phone. "They have agreed to broadcast Maggie Doyle's entire testimony live on an international network. We can present it to the public, if she gets there." "She's on her way. Baker replied from the car. "We'll be in Manhattan by 10 a.m. tomorrow." That evening, a surprising move occurred. Edward Grant appeared on national television in an urgent address, dressed in a dark grey suit, standing before the American flag. His voice was deep and dramatic. "Over the past few days, some dangerous elements have been spreading false information, distorting the legitimate activities of me and Grant Holdings. In particular, I am extremely disappointed that my adopted son, Alexander, has been drawn into this conspiracy. I confirm that the entire data is fake, a sabotage campaign, and I call on the federal government to urgently investigate this group for treason." Back at base, Baker looked at the television screen. "This is a preemptive strike," Linda said. "He wants to shape public opinion before we go public." Alexander turned on his computer and quietly played an old recording between Edward Grant and a hospital director. Edward's voice was clear. "If the child is not cooperating, increase the dose. Just don't leave a body." "This will be the final nail in his coffin," Alexander whispered. "The price of truth is not victory. It is the courage to stand before it is accepted." Linda Torres. Union Square, Manhattan, 10:02 a.m. A makeshift stage has been set up in the center of the square. On the stage is a simple wooden platform, next to which are cameras from 3 independent media outlets, La Verite, Free Nation, and Ghost Press. Hundreds of people have gathered, most of them with phones live streaming. Linda Torres put on an old leather jacket, plugged in her headphones, and connected to a broadcast server in Europe. The signal was stable. The data was encrypted with multiple layers. They only needed 20 minutes. Alexander stood beside Baker and Maggie Doyle, his face stern, his eyes darting around the square. He knew that Edward Grant never kept quiet in the face of losing everything. "No one noticed anything strange?" Baker asked quietly. "Not yet," Alexander replied. "But I feel like someone is waiting for the right moment." 10:05 a.m., livestream begins. Linda gave the signal. Maggie Doyle stepped up to the podium, holding the microphone, her hands still shaking slightly. "Good morning. My name is Maggie Doyle. But for 25 years, I have lived as Margaret Donnelly, because powerful people want me gone." Her voice was firm. No tears. No trembling. No hesitation. "In 1981, I was a subject in a mental rehabilitation program funded by Grant Holdings. I and many other children were injected with experimental psychoactive drugs, detained, mentally tortured, brainwashed. Some did not survive. Those who did were erased." 10:08 to 500 meters away. A dark blue Ford pickup truck was parked on the side of the street, without a license plate. Inside was a man wearing headphones and holding a remote control. He was looking at the screen showing the signal from the square. The green light flashed, recording. He pressed the button to start the timed explosion sequence, 90 seconds. 10:09, on stage. Maggie continued. "I have the names of doctors, technicians, officials, all in this book. I have a recording of Edward Grant directly giving instructions to destroy witnesses, bribe the police, and manipulate the medical system." Baker held up a small silver USB drive to the camera. "We have this backed up across multiple systems globally. If anything happens to us, the data will still exist." Linda nodded. Servers in Belgium, Iceland, and Singapore started broadcasting in parallel. 10:10 to 60 seconds before the explosion. Alexander rolled his eyes, then stopped abruptly. "Wait. That car," he whispered, pointing to the illegally parked Ford. Baker followed. His cop instincts told him immediately, the car had no obvious driver. But the interior lights were on. A decoy. Linda. Cut off the main power, he shouted. Linda immediately unplugged the main data cable and activated the backup signal. Alexander lunged at Maggie, knocking her off the platform. 10-11, heaven-shocking explosion. The Ford exploded, creating a shock wave that blew out the windows on both sides of the square. People ran in panic, screaming. Part of the stage collapsed. Smoke filled the air. Alexander was wounded in the left shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt. But he still lay on top of Maggie, shielding her from the broken glass. Linda crawled away from the console, still holding the headset. Backup signal. Still on, she shouted. 10:13, a global image. Maggie Doyle, blood dripping from her forehead, struggled to stand up amid the dust and smoke. She picked up the battered microphone and spoke directly into the still-functioning camera. I am not afraid of death, because I have died once in my record. But this time, I will live in the truth. The image, of an old woman, covered in dust and blood, standing amid the rubble, went around the world. On Reddit, people called her the last torch. Same day afternoon, media explosion. The FBI announced an urgent federal investigation into Grant Holdings' actions. Several officials were suspended. Several doctors and scientists involved in Project Genesis were arrested. Alexander Grant is officially recognized as a whistleblower. Franklin Baker is rehabilitated. Linda Torres is given full protection by the international press. Edward Grant watches the news from his office. He sat silently. His face did not change color. An advisor beside him asked, "How would you respond?" Edward took a sip of wine, smiling faintly. They think they win. We have one last card. There are moments that do not allow for right choices, only for courageous choices. Franklin Baker. Washington, D.C., 3 a.m. An old industrial area in the south of the city, where a rusted sign hangs with the faded words Belden Logistics. On the surface, it is an abandoned warehouse. But according to the location data from the video sent to Linda, the basement below is where Davis, the first witness to the Bronx arson, is being held. Franklin Baker, Alexander Grant and Linda Torres, along with a small team of investigative journalists and independent agents, approached the building at dawn, supported by a phone jamming system and a reconnaissance drone. Baker stepped back to inspect the gun, his eyes more serious than ever. If Davis is alive, then we are dealing with an organization that is not just Edward Grant, but maybe much larger than him. Third basement, 3:26 a.m. Alexander deciphers the gate's key code using a decoder obtained from a retired agent. Meanwhile, Linda monitors movement from hidden cameras. 2 guards outside. 1 ceiling camera, blind spot to the left of the door, she said quickly. Safe access time, 90 seconds. Baker signaled. They quietly lowered their guards. When the iron door opened, the smell of mold, dried blood, and antiseptic hit them like a slap in the face. Inside, a man was tied to an iron chair, his clothes torn, his ribs clearly visible under his thin skin, but his eyes were still alert. Davis, Alexander whispered. Davis looked up. His lips trembled. Then he managed to get out a sentence. Edward is not the last. There is another. Higher. He has not yet revealed himself. Just then, an alert sound came from Linda's device. Cyber attack, she warned. International data transmission systems are being hacked simultaneously. 3/5 of servers are offline. Alexander paled. If they destroy all the copies, The data will be legally invalid. We won't be able to prove anything. Linda quickly ran through the encryption commands, trying to stay connected. We have a choice, she said, either save Davis and withdraw now, or stay and hold the server by hand, but there's no one guarding the outside. 5 minutes maximum. Silent. Franklin Baker looks at Davis, the man he thought was dead. The man who was the key to the Bronx tragedy. Then he looked at Linda, the woman who survived a bomb blast just to protect a recording. And finally, he looked at Alexander, the son of a victim, raised to serve a dictator. We don't choose between two lives, Baker said. We choose to hold the truth, so that no one else has to die. He turned to Alexander. I'll keep it inside. You go with Linda, stop the cyber attack. Don't let the server go. Alexander hesitated. He didn't want to leave Davis. But he knew, without evidence, all they had done would be a feel-good story. Not the biggest criminal case in America in 3 decades. Are you sure? He asked. Baker nodded. More than ever. Alexander and Linda withdrew from the basement, locking the door behind them. In the underground server room 20 kilometers away, Linda and her team of technicians are fighting every second with the hackers on Grant's side, using AI and botnets to decrypt the 3rd level. They are using a distributed cluster attack. If I don't put up a new firewall in 3 minutes, the data will be forcibly deleted, said one engineer. Linda didn't hesitate. Use virtual backup. Move everything to Cicada node. Alexander checked the line, leading to the European server. Yes. And turn off all access from the US. At the warehouse, Baker was holding Davis's hand, reassuring him with her quiet presence. Davis wheezed, and there's this name. Kavanaugh. He's the head of Project Genesis. No one knows him. No pictures. No records. But he's the one behind Grant. Baker frowned. Who is he? Davis shook his head. All I know is, he was in the Department of Defense. And he's still active. Linda's communication signal came on. It's okay, she said, breathing hard. We got the data. It's all moved to Europe. The US servers are locked. Alexander smiled. We did it. 4:03 a.m., they returned to pick up Baker and Davis. On the way back, Baker closed his eyes and leaned his head against the car window. We have awakened something greater than Grant, he said. This Kavanaugh. He is the true darkness. Alexander asked, do you think there will be more bloodshed? Baker did not answer immediately, but his eyes, scanning the darkness outside, seemed to see a larger battle waiting ahead. I am not afraid of prison. I am afraid of the world going on sleeping with blood flowing at my doorstep. Edward Grant, during his final hearing. Washington, D.C., Capitol Building, 10 a.m. Special hearing of the Federal Commission on Political Crimes and Human Rights Violations, the first in U.S. history to be broadcast live across 48 countries and 5 digital platforms. Edward Grant, former senator, CEO of Grant Holdings, who was a symbol of economic reconstruction after the 1993 crisis, sat in front of the camera, his hands cuffed. His face gaunt but his eyes still full of arrogance. Across the table were Franklin Baker, Linda Torres, Alexander Grant, Maggie Doyle, and Davis, the living witness who was thought to be dead. The hearing is now open. The chairman of the committee banged his gavel. 10:15, first testimony, Maggie Doyle. She needed no paperwork. She looked straight into the camera, recounting the long nights of drug testing, being erased from society, the children in her room disappearing with each anonymous injection. Someone was coordinating this. Edward Grant was just the guy marketing it. Behind him was someone no one dared to mention. But we all heard him on the intercom. His name was Kavanaugh. 10:32, second testimony, Davis. He trembled as he stepped onto the podium, requiring assistance from staff. I used to keep financial records for Grant Holdings. I saw special payments going to organizations that didn't exist on paper: South Shore Rehabilitation Center, Rindell Research Institute, and a company called Aegis Structures. Davis paused for a moment, then looked straight into the camera. Aegis is a cover for a unit called Spectre Division, something that only Kavanaugh runs. 10:50, third testimony, Alexander Grant. He wore a simple black suit. No badge. No title. When he stepped onto the podium, the whole hall fell silent. I am the heir to that empire. I know I am the adopted child of a dictator. But I am also the product of the victims. And I choose to stand with them. He presented financial data maps, photographs of anonymous victims, and coded lists of black funds. I do not seek forgiveness. I seek justice, even if it bury the name I once bore. 11:20, Edward Grant is called up. The whole country waited. All cameras were focused on the man who controlled billions of dollars, manipulated the media, and made the entire political system bow down. Edward sat up straight. No handcuffs. No flicker in his eyes. Mr. Grant, said the chairman of the committee, you have the right to remain silent, but you also have the right to speak. Edward smiled, tilted his head, and spoke into the microphone. Silence is what I used to hide. But today, I will speak. In front of the camera, he admitted everything. Money laundering for human testing projects. Plant evidence to get Franklin Baker fired. Directly ordered the murder of Davis, but failed. Partnering with an extra-governmental entity, Spectre Division, run by Kavanaugh. I was his best henchman. But when I wanted to stop, I was put on the kill list. 11:42, shocking twist. Edward looked straight into the camera. He's still there. He's watching me on another screen. And I don't think I'm leaving this building. Just seconds later, Edward stopped. Cold sweat broke out. His vision blurred. His hands began to twitch. The whole hall was in chaos. The doctor rushed in. But it was too late. Edward Grant collapsed, blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. 11:47, preliminary medical report, poisoning. A rare poison discovered by oral administration, one that could only be activated by remote frequency. Which meant, someone had ordered him killed in real time, the moment he started giving Kavanaugh's name. Linda tightened her grip on the earpiece. He knows too much. And Spectre doesn't let anyone leak information and live. Alexander sat silently. So is that the end? He asked. Franklin Baker shook his head, his voice low. No. This is just the first crack in the wall he built. But that wall is about to fall. The end does not come when we take our revenge. The end comes when we stop being afraid of the light. Franklin Baker. Keflavik International Airport, Iceland, 6:14 a.m. The cold wind whipped like razor blades. Iceland was covered in thick fog. Outside the international terminal were three figures in hooded coats, Linda Torres, Alexander Grant, and Franklin Baker. Under their cloaks, they carry something that could shake a power structure that has existed for nearly 40 years. The code HX7914, believed to be the coordinates of the main archive of Spectre Division, the underground organization run by Kavanaugh, and also the one behind the death of Edward Grant. 8 a.m., Reykjavik suburbs, The coordinates took them to a sparse pine forest 20 miles from the capital. Here, amid a cluster of concrete prefabricated houses, a building sunk into the ground, no sign, no security guard. Alexander checked the main door with the signal scanner. There's dual fingerprint security, but there's also a backup power line. I can break it. Baker looked around. Don't take more than 5 minutes. I don't think this place is just for decoration. 8:12 a.m., they get inside. The space was dark, save for the flickering lights of rows of servers. Code streamed across the screen, multilingual, multi-regional, highly encrypted. Linda walked over to the main control panel and plugged in the secure USB. The interface lit up with the words. Welcome. Spectre user _000001. Alexander frowned. He left the port open? Or was he waiting for us? Baker nodded slightly. Maybe both. 3rd floor below, secure data warehouse. There. Linda found a sealed compartment with an old logo engraved on it, Aegis Structures, the name of the financial shell mentioned in Davis's testimony. She opened it. Inside was a specially preserved physical file, old printing papers, black and white photos, the red seal of the Ministry of Defense. First sheet. Kavanaugh. David E. born 1951, former psychological warfare commander. U.S. Department of Defense Security Code, Scarlet Fury status, unknown, top secret. Immune from prosecution. Alexander stared at the photo, a man with slicked-back silver hair. A sharp face. Eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen. No one ever recognized him. Because he didn't need to stand out, Baker whispered. He just needed to be able to give orders. In the next file, they found the order to kill Project Genesis was signed by Kavanaugh himself, but was rescinded shortly thereafter, without going through Congress. Secret funding from multinational corporations to sustain civilian rehabilitation programs in developing countries. Plan to plant people in U.S. legislatures, including the names of 17 sitting senators. Linda turned to Baker. We are holding the biggest political bomb of the century. 9:30 a.m., return to temporary base in Reykjavik. Linda began encrypting the captured data, preparing to send it to 3 international organizations at once, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and the Global Network for Free Press. Alexander sat alone in the corner of the room, looking at the photo of Kavanaugh. So, the real person behind all this wasn't my foster father, he said softly, but a ghost that my father feared too. Baker patted him on the shoulder. You are no longer Grant's son. You are the one who dares to step out of that shadow. And only those people can end this cycle. 12 p.m., the world gets the truth. International media networks simultaneously received data from Linda's group. Headlines covered: Kavanaugh, the faceless man behind the government's Spectre division, the underground structure of power and psychological genocide. Edward Grant is just the surface, the man behind all the darkness has finally revealed. That night, Union Square. Franklin Baker returns to the same place where 30 years ago he was called an evidence manipulator, a failed officer, and a psychopath living in a delusional state. This time, he stepped onto the small stage without any introduction. The light shone on his wrinkled face, his eyes deep but bright. There are wars that last a lifetime. There are truths that take 30 years to be heard. And there are those who seem to have nothing left. Who save the rest of us? He held up the Spectre files, no longer a secret, but a legacy. In a dark room halfway around the world, Kavanaugh watched the whole thing on an anonymous screen. He was silent, not angry. A new game is about to begin, he whispered. Then he turned off the screen, stepped out of the darkness. Another person next to him asked, "What should we do?" Kavanaugh smiled slightly. "Nothing. Let them think they won.